So, good morning. I'm Nicholas de Mattos. I'm a tutor and a student in the School of Philosophy and Economic Science. And I'm going to talk to you this morning about Diogenes of Cynic, or otherwise known as Diogenes the Cynic. So, Diogenes the Cynic sounds an unpromising subject for a short talk on philosophy until you realize that cynicism, with a capital C, was actually a worthwhile branch of ancient philosophy, leading on to Stoicism. Cynicism taught that we should live in accordance with nature, with which few would disagree nowadays, but also that we should eschew societal norms and values, which is a bit more controversial. It can be seen how the latter characteristic evolved into the modern concept of cynicism, which questions others' motives and the sincerity or goodness of human actions. Diogenes himself was born in about 410 BC in Cynic, a thriving coastal colony on the Black Sea. He was the son of a prosperous money changer called Eccentric, who ensured his son's good and privately funded all-round education. Eccentric was a local magistrate, a position which Diogenes also held for a time, and indicates that he joined his father's business and was himself a respected citizen until disaster struck. Eccentric and his son were accused of defacing or re-stamping the coinage which passed through their hands. If this were true, and apparently in one of his later treatises Diogenes himself admitted it, and even modern archaeology has confirmed the existence of altered coins bearing the inscription Eccentric, then he or his father, or both, would have melted coins, possibly altering the metal content and re-stamping them with a higher value emblem. At any rate, father and son were found guilty, and although accounts vary as to what happened to Eccentric as a public official, it seems certain that Diogenes was exiled. Exile in ancient times was the next most serious punishment after execution. It meant that one was denied the right to one's ancestral property and land, and thence to the right of burial with one's ancestors. However, Diogenes, although he could not contravene the sentence of exile, rejected the idea of his being deprived in any way, instead embracing the opportunity to escape worldly ties. Taking with him Manes, his Phrygian slave, he began traveling. And it was this that, according to Plutarch, developed the philosopher in him. At one point, the story goes, he was resting with Manes by the roadside, and he observed a mouse passing in and out of a hole in a nearby rock. He was struck by its uncomplicated existence and determined to follow its example. Manes, however, had had enough, and while en route to Delphi, where Diogenes had decided to go to consult the oracle, he absconded. Diogenes apparently shrugged and said, if Manes can do without Diogenes, then Diogenes can do without Manes, and continued his journey. At Delphi, Diogenes asked the oracle what he might do to gain renown. As though the oracle knew his background, it replied, subvert the currency. Knowing that the oracle's answers were always analogous, he took currency to refer to the customs and norms of society, and he made it his goal, as he put it, parakarasein to nomisma, to revalue the currency, perhaps reversing what he'd done wrong, but in a different way. He seems then to have travelled to Athens from Delphi and met the philosopher Antisthenes, who, with Plato, had been an ardent disciple of Socrates and had been present at the latter's execution by hemlock. It seems likely that Diogenes was on conversational terms with all Athenian philosophers at the time who might have attended the Academy, the philosophical centre which Plato had founded in the suburb of that name in Athens. In fact, the rest of Diogenes' life was a bewildering mix of quite prolific writing, philosophical discussion, and teaching, and often bizarre and eccentric living. And actually, Diogenes is shown here lolling about on the steps in front of Plato and Aristotle, as befits his subsequent reputation. In terms of his writing, none of it survives, possibly due to his refusal to shy away from the most horrific issues known to man, such as cannibalism, incest, and parricide. In his philosophical discussions, he publicly questioned those who claimed to possess wisdom, particularly the paid philosophers called sophists, often using abrasive and critical language. Plato used to describe him as Socrates gone mad. And this is a sort of idealized picture of Plato on the left and Diogenes on the right, pointing to him. Diogenes used to refer to himself as cosmopolites, a citizen of the world. Regarding his bizarre and eccentric living during the winter months, Diogenes became known for living in a large earthenware jar, and for summer, traveled to Corinth, where he lived in the open, cooled by the breeze across the isthmus. To folk who commented on his austere lifestyle, he compared himself to the king of Persia, who wintered in Babylon and Susa and spent his summers in the cooler Ecbatana. Needless to say, Diogenes survived on the bare minimum, dramatized in this picture, completely self-sufficient, unconcerned with what fate delivered him, and rationalized any suffering. He walked around barefoot, with a cloak which doubled as bedding for the night. He rejected the normal manners of society and didn't disdain to beg as being adequate compensation for his efforts to change society. Later in life, he became a well-known eccentric in Athens, and the citizens took to his presence, even providing him with a new jar out of public funds when some youths, as a prank, broke his old one. Once he watched a boy drinking from a water fountain by cupping his hands underneath the flow, and instantly threw away his cup in favor of nature's cup, his own hands. He used to wander the streets of Athens by day, holding a lit lantern and saying that he was looking for a man. Since there were plenty of men around, the natural question it provoked was, what makes a true man? Diogenes visited many cities, always walking with his staff. He admired Sparta, but during one of his philosophical discourses, a Spartan quoted Hesiod, "One's ox would not die if one's neighbor were not evil," and asked for Diogenes' comments. Diogenes retorted that the Messenians were the Spartans' neighbors, and yet the Spartans allowed both the Messenians and their oxen to die, suggesting that the Spartans were evil. Like Socrates, Diogenes did not care whom he offended in speaking the truth, for it was well known at the time that the Messenians were the Helots, to all intents and purposes, Spartan slaves. Once Diogenes was traveling by ship to Aegina, an island off the Athenian coast, when it was overrun by pirates who took him prisoner and transported him to a slave market in Crete. There he was put on display at a slave auction, and men started bidding for him. An educated slave fetched a very high price in those days. Looking around, unconcerned at the bidders, he noticed a man called Xeniades. Diogenes then called out to the auctioneer to sell him to this man, for, he said, he could see that he needed a master. It says something for Diogenes' natural authority that the auctioneer complied with this very presumptuous request of Xeniades' character, that he accepted it. Xeniades took him back to Corinth, where he was a prosperous businessman, and had Diogenes tutor his sons and manage his household affairs, which Diogenes, in spite of his maverick nature, did reliably for some time. In gratitude, Xeniades freed Diogenes, and the philosopher lived alone once more in a grove on the outskirts of Athens. Now, there's a lot to be said about Diogenes, and I see that time is moving on, so I'm actually going to tell this story in two parts. So this is the end of part one of the amazing story of Diogenes, and I'm going to go straight to the quote, which you'll see in chat. The quote said, "Let the whole world be a bed large enough for me. Let me call the universe my home." So let's consider the significance of this quote. So a bed is a place of rest, of comfort and restoration. But he can't have been referring to it as a place for sleep, because he survived on very little sleep. So he must have developed the ability to rest and relax in the world as a bed. And not only a bed, but one large enough for him. So was he speaking from a huge ego? Possibly. But I prefer to think of him as finding that elusive unity with everything, in which the ego falls quite away. If you think about it, if that were the case, you would easily think of the world as your bed and the universe as your home. So as I usually do, I was trying to think of an example of this in my own life, but of course I couldn't, until I realized that every time I feel happy and free, and everything seems beautiful and as on a fresh sunny day, and crucially, I'm not thinking about myself, then I'm as near to what Diogenes is talking about that I can get. And more than this, if I keep appreciating this sense of unity as often as possible, it will grow into a brilliant habit. So anyone can do this. And let's use those moments in our own lives which are happy and carefree, when everything seems beautiful, and really savor them. So if you've enjoyed this presentation, then like it and share it. This is the last Philosophy Live session this term, and we'll be returning to Philosophy Live at the end of September, I believe. Anyway, watch this space. So thank you very much for watching, and have a good day. Bye.